So now we get into episode 2. Now shortly after this, Talthybius orders his men to bring out Cassandra, but then he thinks that the enslaved women are attempting to set fire to themselves, which prompts him to consider that these are a proud people. In circumstances like these, they don't take kindly to humiliation. Now Cassandra then enters and she begins to celebrate her impending marriage to Agamemnon, which makes the chorus think she's possessed. She even says, "I shall enjoy a husband bedded by the hand of destiny." Now Hecuba laments this, saying that she has been thrust at spear point into some Greek's bed as a slave of his lust, and that Cassandra is in such a half-crazed state that she is unable to truly fathom this. Now to this, however, Cassandra responds with an explanation that the reason she looks forward to her marriage with Agamemnon, who is a king, is because it will enable her to destroy him and his legacy from the inside. Now this becomes quite clear when she says, "By means of this marriage of mine, I shall destroy him." Now this is important for several reasons. It's important to remember that the Trojan War preceded the writing of this play by about 800 years or so. So the audience of Athenian men watching this play would have already been familiar with this story and with this mythology. Now remember that Cassandra was cursed with the ability to see the future, but have no one believe her. Now at this point, she knows the future. She knows that she will return with Agamemnon, and both of them will be killed by Agamemnon's wife, which is Clytemnestra. Now, full disclosure, Clytemnestra is not mentioned by name, nor is this outcome revealed explicitly in the play, but again, the audience viewing the play already knows this. And when the audience knows something that the characters in the narrative do not, that is something that we refer to as dramatic irony. So dramatic irony is one reason why this is important. Another reason why this is important is because it reveals something that's profoundly tragic about Cassandra's mindset. Now here is a woman, she's lost her family, many of whom have been brutally slaughtered, and she is being claimed as a concubine to be usurped by a foreigner. And yet Cassandra celebrates this news. She celebrates this news because she knows that getting married to Agamemnon will ensure that they return to his home together to be murdered by his wife. And through his death, Cassandra will, in a way, avenge the members of her own family that have been killed as a result of Agamemnon's war efforts with the Greeks. Now in her mind, this is something to celebrate. She is happy that the ending of her own life will ensure the ending of Agamemnon's life, all to avenge her family who, you guessed it, already lost their lives too. Jesus, so much death, man! Anyway, that's pretty sad, but there are a few other important remarks that Cassandra makes, the most pertinent of which is when she argues that despite their current suffering as Trojans, the Greeks have suffered more. Now while the city of Troy has been decimated and the Trojan people have been destroyed, she argues that they won the greatest of all glories. They died fighting for their fatherland. And if an enemy spear found its target and in a moment made a living man into a corpse, that man was carried from the field by his own platoon. The earth that covered him was the sacred soil of the land of his fathers. The hands that wrapped him in his shroud were the right hands, according to the customs of burial in our country. And those Trojan soldiers who didn't die in battle lived at home, spending every day with their wives and children, the simplest of pleasures denied to the Greeks. Sorry for quoting such a large chunk. Do not do that in your essays. Only do the key words. But what Cassandra is saying is that despite their destruction, the Trojans lived good lives and they died honorable deaths. And they were afforded the honorable burial rites that were highly esteemed in that time. Now this is in contrast to the Greeks, as Cassandra states, these Greeks, then they began to die. And they kept on dying. And for what reason? They weren't being robbed, they weren't being invaded, they didn't see the towers and battlements of their homeland being occupied. And those who became the war god's victims had forgotten what their children looked like. They weren't washed and shrouded and laid to rest by their wives' loving hands, and now their bodies lie forgotten in foreign country. And things were no better at home. Their women died in the loneliness of widowhood. Their fathers became childless old men who had bred up their sons for nothing, to lie in a distant country with no relatives to honor them and make sacrifices at their graves. So while the Greeks may have won the physical war, they seem to have lost something very spiritual, and vice versa with the Trojans. They lost the physical war, but seemed to gain a very spiritual kind of glory that they would not have attained otherwise. For Cassandra says, any sensible man must hate war. He does his best to avoid it. But if it should come, even if it should end like this, it is no shame for a city. Indeed, it is a crown of honor to die nobly with dignity. The really shameful thing is to die dishonorably, ignobly, without pride. So the Trojans, according to Cassandra, associated with honor, and the Greeks are associated with dishonor. Yeah? Cool. Now to this, Talthybius pretty much says that if Cassandra wasn't so damn crazy, he might have been offended and punished her accordingly. Before she exits, however, Cassandra condemns Talthybius as a lackey doing great men's dirty work, and that Odysseus will suffer a long trip home only to find it torn apart by troubles, 10,000 of them. Now this is another instance of dramatic irony, because again, the audience knows that this will be the case. Odysseus' journey home is fraught with extreme difficulty, to say the least. She even lists a bunch of hardships that he will be subject to, and in fact, this is a brief summary of Homer's The Odyssey. Pick that one up if you get the chance. Riveting read. Also, as a side note, your text may say that this particular piece of dialogue is spoken by the chorus, the summary of Odysseus' trip home. This is a typo. This is supposed to be Cassandra's line, not the chorus. Doesn't make any sense for the chorus to be prophesying the future. That's Cassandra's thing. Anyway, as Cassandra exits with the guards, she reiterates, "Greet me with joy for the victory I bring. The family at whose hands Troy died and all her people perished, the house of Atreus destroyed." Atreus being the father of Agamemnon and Menelaus, so she's just referring to their house and their legacy. But again, Cassandra is happy to die if it means destroying her enemies and avenging her family. It's pretty messed up, man. Now after this, Hecuba collapses, and while the chorus seeks to aid her, she refuses their help. She says, "What I am suffering and have suffered, what I will suffer yet, is more than enough to make anyone fall and never get up again," which is, fair enough. You lose your husband, you lose your children, you turn into a slave while your home burns around you. Yeah, that's a pretty bad day for anyone. Anyway, Hecuba then describes how tragic it is to be born lucky, that is, to live as a queen, as she did, but how her following fall from power was ultimately a betrayal by the gods to heighten the tragedy of what has happened to her now. She laments about having been queen with a good husband and brave sons, only to see them all slaughtered by the swords and spears of the Greeks, and even her daughters, who she brought up with such care to make them fit brides for princes, have now been captured and enslaved. Their good breeding wasted on brutal soldiery and foreigners. Now there's also Hecuba herself, who is doomed to finish her life as a slave, and in the midst of this all, she blames Helen, that one woman and her love affair, which is what we explained at the start. Now it's important to note that Hecuba and many others blame Helen for starting the war, because to them, Helen willingly made off with Paris. It was not something that she was forced into, and this is what provoked Menelaus' attempts to retrieve her, even though it meant killing a bunch of people. So Hecuba ends up by saying that wealth, good fortune, it's all worth nothing now. There is no happiness, the lucky ones are dead. The buckets of sunshine this lady is. But now we get into episode 3. Now the chorus then goes on to lament and describes the way in which Troy's destruction came about via the Trojan horse. So we already know this, so we can skip right past that and go to the entrance of Andromache, Hecuba's daughter-in-law, who is carrying with her her son Astyanax. Now together, she and Hecuba lament about their fallen home, their destroyed families. Now remember, Andromache is Hecuba's daughter-in-law because she was married to Hecuba's son, Hector. Andromache reveals to Hecuba that Polyxena, Hecuba's daughter, has been murdered at Achilles' tomb as a sacrifice to the dead. So Hecuba sort of already knew this, Andromache is now just kind of confirming that. So the two of them engage in a brief debate about who has it better between the living and the dead, while Hecuba states, "No one is happy or dead, the living at least have hope, to be dead is to be nothing." Andromache asserts that to be dead is the same as never to have been born, but to die is better than a life of agony, because the dead feel nothing and no pain can touch them anymore. So Hecuba is saying that if you're alive, you have hope. Andromache is saying, "Nah mate, if you're dead, then at least there's no more suffering." So as mentioned earlier, Hecuba goes back and forth a little bit. Now Andromache goes on to say how despite being made to marry Neoptolemus, her love for Hector, her deceased husband, and Hecuba's son is too great. Now to abide by her impending marriage would be to betray her beloved Hector, and this is something that she just does not like. Now to this, Hecuba says, "Be pleasant, make yourself attractive to him," referring to Neoptolemus. "That way you will make everyone's captivity easier to bear and your own life more pleasant. With luck, you may bring up this grandson of mine to be the savior of Troy." Now this is interesting because she's telling Andromache to put up with the suffering wrought by an unwanted marriage to a Greek, so that she can raise her son to overthrow them all and one day rebuild Troy. Now firstly, this shows that Astyanax is a representation of hope, the hope of Troy, because if he lives, he may one day rebuild Troy. But secondly, this is interesting because just earlier, Cassandra suggested something that was not entirely dissimilar to this, and yet Hecuba thought that she was crazy. But This might be as simple as the fact that Andromache's got the son who might grow up and rebuild Troy, whereas Cassandra is apparently just happy about marriage to a foreigner, so kind of crazy. And that's part of the curse that she has. Might be as simple as that. Who knows? Either way, it might be worth looking into the similarities and differences between those two particular characters. I'll let your mind wander with that. So Talthybius returns, and then he sees the Styanax, and then he's pretty much like, who's that kid? See that kid? Kill that kid. But yeah, so it looks like Hecuba jinxed it. So Talthybius informs them that the Greeks have decided that Astyanax, Andromache's son, is to be killed because it is feared that Hecuba's suggestion will come to pass. They fear that he will grow up and seek vengeance for the destruction that the Greeks brought on Troy. Astyanax is to be thrown from the battlements of Troy, thrown from atop the towers to his death. Now, understandably, Andromache and Hecuba both lament this turn of events, and Talthybius reminds them that they are quite without any power to prevent it, which is, alright, rub it in their faces, mate. But this prompts Hecuba to reflect that they have endured every pain and every torment, such that there is no agony we don't already feel, no abyss of pain to discover. So Andromache and Astyanax are forcibly removed from one another and carried in separate directions. Oh, my heart. This sequence is often described as one of the most potent, the most heartbreaking in the play. The separation of Andromache and her son, which is just a side note, I suppose. Wang.